Internet freedom is a subject very much in the headlines these days, and synonymous with internet freedom, increasingly, is the word pirate. It started with piracy and the idea that information on the internet could be copied and passed along, sometimes without copyright. But the issues involved with the reaction to this and governments trying to pass legislation to try and restrict access to the internet to do with piracy have caused a lot of controversy, and pirate parties have sprung up to try and promote the rights of internet freedom. We are lucky enough to have with us the founder of the original pirate party here in Sweden, Rick Falkvinge. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Okay. Just recently we've been conveniently provided with 3 examples, a significant defeat, it seems, for the pirate movement, a success and a future battle. I'll start with bad news, the defeat, another name including Pirate Bay, here in Sweden, large fines, prison sentences. How do you feel about that result?
I think it's absolutely horrible. I think that was an excellent example of how the establishment takes its own privileges and the status quo of the incumbent industries ahead of laws. Government cares for itself first and then for citizens. If you look at previous new political movements, I mean, you had the liberal movement, which came 120 years ago. You had the Social Democrat and Labour movement, which came about 80 years ago. You had the Green movement coming about 40 years ago. All of them challenged the establishment and the status quo to the point where the early activists, frankly, went to jail. And in history, we regard those that went to jail as heroes. So it's a shame, but perhaps being cynical, that's the way it goes. And these people will be heroes in the history books.
There is another side. There are people who say, look, how much material went through that site and how much of it should have had some rights money going to the people who made it and that didn't get to them?
I think that's an interesting argument. Now, what you're essentially asking me is interpretation of the law, and I didn't become a lawyer but a politician because I think the law is wrong and I want to change it. So looking at the income for musicians since the advent of Napster, in the file sharing era, we find that the average income for musicians have risen 114% in the past 10 years. The average income per musician has risen 66%, and 28% more get some sort of this share. What is true is that the parasitic middlemen, who are, if I'm going to be a bit derogatory here, who are in the piece of plastic construction industry, have seen their record sales just go through the floor. And that's excellent for artists, since these are a link in the value chain that used to take 95% of the cut, and artists have found out how to circumvent them, so much more money to the artists. However, this particular link sits on all the lobbying power and most of the legislation power, so these parasitic middlemen are trying to legislate their place in the market, which from an entrepreneurial perspective is just anti-market, monopolistic and outrageous. From a solidarity perspective, it's outrageous because it's corporativist repression. So if you're caring for artists, then you certainly should not look at the record industry, which have done their utmost since their inception to rob artists of their money.
I see your target here, and I see the way it's a well-framed argument, and I think it has it's obviously gained a lot of traction. But the person sitting at their computer who downloads a film, for example, that they know that they're not paying for, there's no issue with that?
None whatsoever. I mean, the issue here is, if you're running a business, then it's your responsibility to find a business model within the current constraints of society that allows you to make money. You don't get to dismantle civil liberties even if you can't make money, or perhaps even especially if you can't make money. A corporation's profitability does not factor into our degree of freedom of speech. So, yes, the Pirate Bay might have done something illegal. I don't think they did, but then again, I'm not a lawyer. In any case, I'm absolutely adamant that what they did was beneficial to society and to art history. And so it should not be illegal under any circumstance.
Well, I think you're not alone in that opinion, because we'll go on now to the victory. There's been a victory for the pirate movement, and not just the pirate movement, in America. With Soper and Pieper
Right.
have really met up against an, I think, unexpected amount of resistance. Do you think that this is perhaps a slap in the face to media companies that perhaps felt that they could steamroller the process?
I think it's tremendously important. I mean, you have 250 million Europeans sharing culture in violation of this old copyright distribution monopoly. To them, it's arrogant beyond description that a corporate structure takes the right to determine what they can say to other citizens. We have a generation that's grown up learning that they can say whatever to whomever on the planet and just let the ideas battle it out for themselves. We have this perfect Enlightenment era ideals where it's really a battle of ideas and it doesn't matter who says them. All of a sudden, corporations want to take that away, and it's not enough to say that the younger generation perceives this as incredibly offensive. So, Soper and Pieper, I think that was the first case where the general population really woke up to realizing that what we have been saying all along isn't wolf crying. We are actually warning for a very real danger out there. And what we saw was millions, literally, of people rising up and demanding their rights. And I think that was a beautiful thing. And these trade representatives used to working in the shade, working in the dark, just agreeing in backroom deals what kind of level of freedom of speech we should have, were just taken by surprise. And again, you have this key element that politicians started to fear for their jobs. If that hadn't happened, Soper and Pieper would already have passed. But politicians sort of saw the floor crumble beneath their feet because they started to realize that same as here in Europe, 250 million Europeans sharing culture. That's not a problem with a couple of teenagers. That's half the voting population. And if you want to keep your job, you can't call them criminal.
Public interest, a nice point to move on to your coming battle. Or perhaps it's too late. With the anti-counterfeiting trade agreement, ACTA was recently signed by the EU member states. It's been watered down a lot since the beginning. Is it really so dangerous?
People have woken up. These rallies are huge. I mean, if you look at Poland, the rallies that have already been are absolutely astounding, and people are frankly demanding their rights. ACTA means censorship of the net, and that is not acceptable. Not to the generation growing up, not to the people who understand what the net is about, and that it's the greatest equalizer that mankind has ever invented. And that's not something we are ready to give up, frankly. We are discovering things that just shouldn't be there. The European Commission went down the other day and said that this is no big deal. Everybody will be free to keep sharing governmentally approved things, and that's not what they should be saying. They should say that you still have freedom of speech, not freedom of speech for what we approve of.
Look into your crystal ball, your digital crystal ball for us, and look towards the future, 10, 20, maybe even 50 years in the future. Do you see an internet that is free and open and equal, or do you see dark clouds ahead?
I think we're at a crossroads right now. This technology can be used to create such a dystopic Big Brother society that if you'd written a book about it in the 50s or even the 80s, it would have been discarded as plain unrealistic. I mean, you have police Trojans now that are planted on suspects' computers, or even non-suspects' computers, for the police to see what they are doing. These Trojans have access to the microphones and cameras of the computers, so that we are now at this stage, this dystopic scene of the 1950s, where there were cameras in people's homes. The only thing missing from the scenario was that we bought them ourselves. That was the one thing that wasn't foreseen. On the other hand, you can also use this technology to create a society where power holders are more accountable than ever to the voting citizenry. You can create a society where ideas get to battle it out without interference from who said what and what's their background. You can create a society where culture can flourish like never before and ideas can flourish like never before. And that battle stands right now. And the question is, who controls the internet? I want it to be the citizens. There are people who want it to be the previous set of industries. And if they win, we get a Big Brother society. If the citizens win, we get a democracy richer than any before.
Mr. Falkvinge, thank you very much.
Thank you.